What do furries have to do with your faith? More than you think. Let's talk about how community shapes your faith and how it was never meant to be a solo act. Well, hey, welcome. I'm Chris. I'm the pastor at Compass. As always, I'm really glad you're with me today. Now, Jesus told his followers that they were going to receive power to be his witnesses, to carry his message and make disciples. And we've been exploring how their witness can become ours, how the same spirit that moved them then can move through us now. And we're going to continue today by talking in what I think is the only way we can, by talking about furries. If you're unfamiliar, furries are people who share an interest in animal characters that have human qualities, and then they create fursuits to cosplay as those characters, or their fursonas. And this is not some tiny corner of the internet. The Midwest Fur Fest in Chicago had over 16,000 attendees last year. You might have a furry in your family and have no idea. But what's fascinating about furries, it isn't just the costumes, it's the community. See, when people gather around a shared interest, they don't just meet, they form shared behaviors, values, and expectations. And the furry community is known for inclusion, acceptance, creative expression, and for helping each other overcome social anxiety or shyness. I mean, they're also known for not touching someone else's fur without permission, but it's a community that shapes people. You may think furries are strange, but how many times have you put on your team's jersey to go watch a game with other fans? How many Disney Facebook groups have you posted pictures of Benny the Epcot garbage can in? Raising my hand. How often do you go to your romantic fantasy book club to talk about the forbidden love between a human and a fairy? We all have communities, and every community forms behaviors that become identifiers. And this is true whether you're a furry or a Bears fan, or both. And it was true for the very first followers of Jesus. The first church, it was just figuring things out as they went, because everything kept shifting in their world, and they were just trying to keep up, just like we do when life hits the reset button without permission. See, first Jesus was there, and then he died. Then he rose from the dead, but then he ascended, and he was gone again. And now they had to define what life looked like as followers of someone who they couldn't physically follow. And as the church gathered and grew, they started to form these shared values and habits that became identifiers of their community. What were they? Well, we can see them here in Acts 2:42. All the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. Now, when Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, when he described this new thing, this new church that was happening, he named 4 behaviors on purpose. 4 things that the early church was known for: teaching, care, food, and prayer. And these weren't random activities. They were an extension of who Jesus was and how he lived. And the first thing is they were devoted to teaching. Acts 5:42 shows us how central teaching was. It says every day in the temple and from house to house, they continued to teach and preach this message. Jesus is the Messiah. If the early believers were going to follow Jesus, they should probably understand who Jesus was, what he said, and what he did. And so they went to the people who lived with Jesus and who had been witness to everything Jesus had said and done, the disciples, who they now called the apostles. And the apostles taught the parables, the scriptures, and the connections that Jesus had made, as well as stories of how he lived. And the believers devoted themselves to learning, and the apostles devoted themselves to teaching, because that's exactly what Jesus had done. Look at Matthew 4:23. Jesus traveled throughout the region of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. Teaching wasn't a class. It was an orientation for a new life. It helped them to see the world through a new lens. And teaching became an identifier, because a church that doesn't learn about Jesus stops looking like Jesus. For us, this means intentionally making space to learn and be taught. And we have way more tools than they did. We got church services, books, podcasts, small groups. What's happening right now is teaching. They were devoted to teaching because Jesus taught. Second, they were devoted to care. Now, the word used for it here is fellowship, but we don't really have a full grasp of how big that word is and what it encompasses. Fellowship sounds like potlucks and small talk, but the Greek word Luke uses is koinonia, which means a shared purpose, shared responsibility, shared sacrifice. Look at Acts 2:42 through 45. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. This is more than just chatting over coffee in the lobby at church or liking someone's post. It's sharing common life. It's meeting the needs of other community members, helping, supporting, and loving each other. It's care that costs something. And again, it looks exactly like Jesus. Look what Luke wrote in Luke 8:1 through 3. Soon afterward, Jesus began a tour of the nearby towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news about the kingdom of God, teaching. He took his 12 disciples with him, along with some women who'd been cured of evil spirits and diseases, and many others who were contributing from their own resources to support Jesus and his disciples. Jesus traveled with his disciples and people who he'd healed and set free, while at the same time being supported by people who shared their resources freely. And let me point out that many of them were women who were marginalized and powerless in society, but not with Jesus. He shared a common life with his followers. He had fellowship with them, and he gave us a reminder of why this common life is so important. Look what he said in Matthew 18:20. For where 2 or 3 gather together as my followers, I am there among them. Jesus is present when his people gather, when we have fellowship and share common life, when we care for one another. The first believers were devoted to care because Jesus cared, but they were also devoted to a third thing. They were devoted to food. Now, if I accomplish nothing else today, let it be said that I redefined the best part of following Jesus, the food. Now, this may be the best argument for becoming a Christian, and it's no joke. One of the top 4 identifying features of the early church is that they ate together all the time. And not just churchy religious meals. Look again at Acts 2:42. It says all the believers devoted themselves to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper. Luke is saying this. He's saying, oh yeah, they shared meals together all the time. And sometimes it was even the Lord's Supper. They didn't just eat a communion meal together. They threw dinner parties. To them, meals were a spiritual practice. And this should come as no surprise because some of the best relationships we have are developed and strengthened over food. Meals bring people together and they erased social divides. Poor people who couldn't afford food were welcomed and provided for by those who could. Widows with nothing were at the head of the table. People who would never eat together in public were now passing the breadsticks. Rich, poor, educated, blue collar, super religious, barely Christian, all eating together. Finding ways to include even the poorest and most marginalized to a common table, like Jesus did. Look at Luke 5:29 through 30. Later, Levi held a banquet in his home with Jesus as the guest of honor. Many of Levi's fellow tax collectors and other guests also ate with them. Jesus ate with tax collectors. Look at Luke 22:15. Jesus said, I've been very eager to eat this Passover meal with you before my suffering begins. Jesus ate with his closest friends. It doesn't stop there. Look at Revelation 3:20. Listen, I am standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and eat with you and you with me. Jesus promises to eat with us. Eating together builds community like almost nothing else. And a Christian community without shared meals becomes a Christian community without shared lives. And there's one last behavior that identified the Christian community. They were devoted to prayer. Now, this should come as no surprise that followers of Jesus would be devoted to prayer because Jesus was. Luke wrote it in Luke 5:16. but Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. Prayer wasn't optional for Jesus, and so it wasn't optional for his people. Now, after naming these 4 core church behaviors, teaching, care, food, and prayer, Luke then went on to describe how they were lived out. Look at this, Acts 2:43 through 46. He says that a deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared their meals with great joy and generosity. Teaching, care, food, and prayer. They were the key behaviors that identified the life of a follower of Jesus. But it was more than just identification. As these believers taught, cared, ate, and prayed together, something happened. Look at this in Acts 2:47. All the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Their shared behaviors became their witness, not their arguments or marketing or church growth strategies, their lives. And the result of all of this was people joining the church and becoming followers of Jesus daily. The way they lived their lives became their witness, teaching, care, food, and prayer. There's one more thing I want you to see, though. See, all of the actions the church was devoted to, they happened together in community, not alone. These were group actions, not individual ones. These core behaviors were only visible because they happened in community. Look, your life can't be a witness if no one can see it. That's why community life is so important. And here's what I want you to take away. Faith lived alone is faith unwitnessed. Faith lived together is hope to the world. Jesus put it this way in Matthew 5:14 through 16. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. And in the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. The church is meant to shine the light of Jesus into a dark world. Our core community behaviors are meant to be shared and seen so they can change both us and others. A lot of us feel like we have to build a life of faith alone. And it's no wonder we feel invisible. Some of you are tired of feeling like you believe in Jesus but have no one to walk with. And it feels like your faith is stuck on mute. But look, you can't shine alone. You shine because you're part of a city. Teaching alone helps you grow, but not others. Prayer alone connects you to God, but not other people. Eating alone, it'll fill you up, but it doesn't build relationships or feed others. And self-care, it'll keep you going, but it leaves others behind. The early church was a light in the dark because they lived these practices together. And people became followers of Jesus because they saw this community of Christians living in a way that looked like nothing else in their world. Not living for power, control, or self-gratification, but living for selfless love. The truth is, we are all furries. We all express the values and behaviors of the groups that we identify with. Every community shapes its people. Every community forms shared behaviors. Every community creates a witness. The question isn't whether you're shaped, it's what's shaping you. And what the early church found is still true today. A life connected to Jesus grows, but a life connected to Jesus and his people shines. Your witness is not just your beliefs or your opinions. It's the way you live, the way you open your life to others, and the way you love. So here's the real question. Is your faith visible enough for anyone else to see? Or are you trying to follow Jesus in private, hoping no one notices? If your life has been changed by Jesus, then teaching, care, food, and prayer won't just be ideas you agree with. They will be practices you choose, habits you build, rhythms that you share with other people. For you, that might be as simple as sticking around for a communion lunch, or inviting one person to lunch, or showing up next week ready to stay and talk instead of heading straight for the parking lot. When we do this, faith becomes contagious, hope becomes visible. See, the world doesn't need louder Christians, it needs brighter ones. So step into community, step into visibility. Let people see the Jesus who's already working in you. Because when we shine together, that's when others can find their way home. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.